What's up? What's up? What is up? This is Queen J, KWEENJAYE on Instagram, and I am sending love to whatever part of the world that you are in, from whatever part of the world you expect me to be in. This is my very first MEMEsponse, guys. And a MEMEsponse is basically just my total fucking black girl nerd way of putting two words together, meme and response. So this will be a crazy, serious, witty, shit talking channel that will be driven by my responses to whatever memes catch my attention. So disclaimer, I am not responsible for whoever I piss off in the making of these videos. This is a no bullshit zone. So welcome. Let's firstly keep in mind that I consider a meme to be any post that has been highly circulated on social media. So the particular meme that I'm discussing today is actually a part of a larger post that was on my timeline. One of my Facebook friends basically compiled a thread of tweets which showed people from African countries detailing their resentment toward African Americans, or Akatas, as they put it. So I literally had to consult one of my Nigerian friends, shout out to Chinedu, about the meaning of the word, which he basically tells me means wild animal with no home. It be your own people, literally. So before I even start talking my shit about this meme and point to the ways that African Americans are constantly the center of scrutiny by people from the land in which we come from and by the people who brought us to this land in the first place, I am going to show you the So the one thing I do appreciate about this meme is its brutal fucking honesty, because I think it actually brings to the forefront the ways in which African Americans are constantly the center of scrutiny by people from the land in which we are supposed to come from and by the people who brought us to this land in the first place. Now, my issues with the meme is that it is extremely ignorant and myopic because it places the responsibility of self-advancement solely into the hands of African Americans, and in doing so ignores the innumerable ways in which the American government has historically disadvantaged African Americans in this country. And it also fails to acknowledge the ways, in fact, that African Americans indeed have asserted themselves and tried to advance themselves in a society that was literally built off of their backs. So I am going to respond with this meme firstly with another meme that should help focus my argument and make clear my view on the system of slavery. What I like about this meme is that it essentially proclaims slavery as a system that advanced one group at the expense of another group. More specifically, in the American context, it advanced the white dominant group at the expense of the African slaves. So slavery necessarily becomes a game of winners and losers. Now, as much as the old me would like to offer a bunch of curse words instead of this well-drafted discussion, I'm going to offer my viewers, taking the high road, I'm going to offer my viewers 3 concrete ways in which African American advancement was thwarted by the American government or by the social hierarchy that stemmed from their policies. And the first and perhaps most crucial way that the American government severely stifled the advancement of colored people is through their anti-literacy laws, these laws which dominated the slave era, and I think we still see the consequences today. So let me clarify that the anti-literacy laws affected freed and enslaved persons alike. They essentially stated that any person, white or colored, enslaved or freed, caught learning to read or congregating a group of slaves with the intent of teaching them to read would be punished. Now, for white people, this would probably mean fines, a flogging, but for slaves, this would mean lashes across the back, maybe getting an ear sliced, a foot cut off, maybe even being lynched if you were a constant offender. Between 1829 and 1834, States like Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and both of the Carolinas enacted these anti-literacy laws that basically prohibited slaves from learning to read or write, because the fear was that slaves who knew how to read would become troublemakers. If you knew how to read and write, you could begin to forge your own freedom papers, which is actually a tactic that many of the slaves resorted to if they were fortunate enough to learn how to write. Also, I think one of the motivations for these anti-literacy laws is the fact that if you limit a person's vocabulary, then you limit their understanding of the world around them. And basically, if you limit their consciousness, then it's easy to keep them docile. But if you give them more words in which to understand their surroundings, then very quickly, as we see in the case of Frederick Douglass and his life story, they become discontent. They become more aware of the injustices in which they are a part of. Institutional slavery. So the consequences of these anti-literacy laws can still be seen today. And if you disagree, just consider the fact that slavery went on for nearly 300 years, starting in 1619 when the Dutch colony brought African slaves over here. It has only been 154 years since the last slave town in Texas received news of emancipation. So American institutional slavery was around for longer than it has been abolished. So of course there are going to be these long-term and even generational and systemic consequences of so many years of injustice and servitude. So I am 25, so this is a more real everyday example of how these consequences of anti-literacy laws can be seen. I am 25. I'm 22. My father is 53 and my grandparents are 70. Neither of my grandparents can read fluently, and they would probably kill me if they knew that I was saying this, but neither of them can read fluently. And basically, I need you all to let that sink in. It is 2019 and there are still African American populations who cannot read. My grandmother can decipher words off of a page, but she could not spell a word back to me. Or if I were to spell a word to her, she would not know what I'm spelling. I just wanted to soak that I did not say my great-great-grandparents, my great-great 3 times great, 4 times great. I said my grandparents, which means just 2 generations before me. You can still see the consequences of anti-literacy laws. And the thwarting of Black advancement did not start with or end with these laws, as we can see with the enactment of the Black Code in between 1865 and 1866, which is 1865 is the year that slavery was abolished in the first place. So essentially, the Black Codes was the American government's way of dealing with the people that they had just freed, deciding what rights to give them and of course what rights not to give them. So they did gain a few more rights, like they were able to legally marry and their marriage would be recognized by the courts. They could sue in legal court. They could also work and earn their wages, but yet they still could not learn to read and write. It was still prohibited to congregate in groups and even worship. It was also prohibited to bear arms or vote. So really, the Black Code sort of stands as just a loophole to slavery. Once it was abolished, the Black Codes came about and sort of reenacted many of the policies of slavery, like the fact that it was legal for a freed person, and they were still calling like white people masters and Black people servants. So this is literally the code of the law itself, which basically says that a master has the right to require their servant to work and reside on their farm 6 days a week from sunup to sundown, and they could not have visitors unless permitted by the master. So this sounds an awful lot like just slavery all over again. So this is after 1865 when everybody believes it was abolished. So one of actually the most controversial aspects of the Black Code was, of course, the labor contracts, which I just explained, but also the vagrancy law, which I consider as sort of a prerequisite for today's mass incarceration of Black bodies, because the vagrancy laws basically allow Black people to be locked up for even minor offenses. And once you were locked up, you had to be committed back into involuntary servitude, which is what they were calling it. And this, to me, sounds a lot like today's prison system. When you go to prison, you have to work, and oftentimes for like cents a day. So the Black Code essentially influenced Jim Crow laws of the early and mid 20th century. So when you question Black advancement, please look at the ways in which my people have been limited by a system that was literally built upon our backs. And once again, the everyday consequences of the Black Code can be seen in everyday life, obviously in mass incarceration, but perhaps less obviously in the fact that the American working class is so highly constituted by Black families. I come from a working class family. I know most of the people I know come from working class family. My grandparents, once again, so I have being a descendant of slaves, being a part of this working class, I have very strong roots in this sort of system, because my grandparents, once again, not my great-grandparents, not my great-greats, my grandparents worked on cotton and fruit farms, which is why they don't know how to read. My grandmother started working on the farm when she was 3 years old. At 6 years old, she started bringing home $3 a day to work from sun up to sundown picking cotton at 6 years old. So these labor contracts and these vagrancy laws basically reinforce slavery, just under different policies. The last example I am going to offer as proof of the outright thwarting of Black advancement in America is the Tulsa Race Riot, which has become more commonly known as the burning of Black Wall Street. And it also has become known as one of the most violent riots in American history. So following World War I, Tulsa became nationally recognized for its thriving community of African Americans in the Greenwood District. This is a riot where no one on the state or federal level was charged. But 300 people were killed, but no one was charged. Very, very, very interesting. So it started when a Black citizen of the Greenwood community, Dick Rowland, was arrested, and other African American members of the community were suspicious about his charges, and basically there became an unrest within the community. So the sheriff finds it wise and so smart to give a group of white men weapons. So they take these weapons, and they are now acting as deputy under the order of the sheriff. So they take these weapons and essentially cause widespread destruction. There was over 1,200 Black businesses and buildings burnt and bombed. This was an attack that took place by air as well as land. Among those businesses was a hospital, a library, a school, stores. So it was initially thought during an investigation that around 35 people were killed, but upon further investigation, it is believed to be between 100 and 300, which is sad because this riot was basically so violent that the number of casualties was never even fully concluded. So once again, we have a faction of American government, which was the police in this Greenwood area, refusing to protect and serve certain groups of people. Officials of the town actually interfered with Red Cross's efforts to rebuild the area after the bombings. So to this day, the Greenwood community has not recovered from that damage, at least not in a way that remedies the lost progress and efforts of the African Americans who became known for their communal and economic prosperity. I have said all of this to say that I hope that my discussion of anti-literacy laws, the Black Code, and the Tulsa Race Riot helps more accurately characterize the plight of African Americans and reveal in a factual way just how our efforts have been thwarted. I don't want to end on a negative note, because it was never intended to be a negative video. So instead, I want it to be a discussion that highlights the resilience, power, and forward trajectory of a group of people constantly misunderstood and mistreated. So peace and love to wherever you may be in the world.